meeting of the Urgency Committee. I'm Elizabeth Jackson, the Democratic Services Manager. Before we go to formal introductions, we'll go straight to the first item on the agenda, which is the appointment of a chair for the meeting. Are there any nominations?
Elizabeth, good evening. It's Councillor Graham Swift. It's standard practice in these urgency committees for the Mayor, when he's in attendance, to chair, and therefore I'd like to take the opportunity to nominate the Mayor for chair for this evening's meeting.
And Councillor Nigel Sims, could I second that motion, please?
Thank you very much. So we'll now need to vote on that. I call out the name of each member present. Please state for, against or abstain to indicate your vote. I will also treat this vote as a formal roll call of members for the meeting and confirmation that members can hear the meeting and be heard by other members. I'll start the roll call now. Councillor Aldred.
For.
Councillor Harrison.
For.
Councillor Haslam.
For.
Councillor Hawke.
For.
Councillor Lumbey.
For.
Councillor Marsh. Councillor Marsh.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Anne Myatt. Councillor Myatt.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Praskos.
For.
Could you hear that? Can you hear that? For.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Yes. Councillor Sims.
For.
And Councillor Swift.
For.
Thank you. So the Mayor is duly appointed to chair the meeting. Mr. Mayor, I'll now hand the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and hopefully everybody can hear me. And can I welcome everybody to the meeting? My name is Councillor Stuart Martin, the Mayor of Harrogate District. For the benefit of members, officers and any public watching the meeting online, I will briefly explain the procedure this meeting will follow. The Urgency Committee meets rarely and is only called on occasions when the Mayor feels it is inappropriate to call an extraordinary meeting of Council. The matter under discussion is one where there is a genuine need for a decision to be taken before the next ordinary meeting of the Council in October. I will begin by asking if any member has a disclosable pecuniary interest for the agenda item in question. If any councillor does, they will be removed from the virtual meeting. Members wishing to speak should send me a brief message using the chat function. Please wait until I call your name before speaking. When the agenda item has been presented to the committee and any questions asked have been answered, I will ask for a proposer and a seconder for the item before moving into debate. Once sufficient debate has taken place, we will then be ready to move to the vote, and I will ask Elizabeth to call out the name of each member present. Please indicate you are either for, against or abstaining. The usual meeting protocols still apply, and please only speak when you're invited to do so. Members and officers should also have regard to the guidance set out in the remote meetings protocol. Please also note that the meeting will be recorded and is being live webcast on YouTube. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulty during the meeting, please contact Samantha Stonebanks on the technical helpline that's on your screen. So moving on to agenda item number 2, apologies for absence and notifications of substitutes. Are there any apologies, Elizabeth?
There's none, Chair.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3, could I ask members to indicate any interest that are necessary to declare under the Code of Conduct? Thank you very much. Agenda item 4, to receive the minutes of the meeting of the Urgency Committee held on the 12th of August 2020. Could I have a mover, please?
Chair, I'm happy to move the minutes.
Thank you very much. Could I have a seconder?
Chair, I'll move second the minutes.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sims. We will now move to the vote. Elizabeth, please.
Thank you. Can you please state for, against or abstain? Councillor Aldred.
Abstain.
Councillor Harrison.
For.
Councillor Haslam. Councillor Haslam.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Hawke.
Abstain.
Councillor Lumby,
Abstain.
Councillor Marsh,
Abstain.
Councillor Martin,
4,
Councillor Anne Myatt,
4.
thank you.
4.
Yeah, thank you for that. Councillor Prescott,
4.
Abstain.
Councillor Sims,
4.
Councillor Swift.
4.
That's carried, Chair. Thank you.
thank you, Elizabeth. And agenda item 5, there is no exempt information. So moving on to agenda item 6, public questions. We have no questions from any members of the public. So we move on to agenda item number 7, the discretionary business grant scheme 2020-2021. Could I ask Julie Gillette, the Revenues, Welfare and Customer Services Manager, to introduce her report, please?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Julie Gillette. I'm the Revenues, Welfare and Customer Services Manager. So the government announced grant funding in March of this year to help small businesses and charities and certain businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector who'd been severely impacted by the COVID-19 lockdown. To date, grants under these schemes totalling over £48 million have been successfully distributed to nearly 4,000 businesses in the district. In May 2020, the government provided local authorities with additional funding to support some businesses who were not eligible for these grants and had fallen through the cracks. The purpose of this report is to seek approval to increase the levels of grants awarded to eligible businesses based on 5% of the overall grant funding allocation for small and retail, hospitality and leisure grant schemes. A discretionary business grant scheme was developed to determine those businesses who would be eligible for a grant and the criteria that to be met. The scheme took into account the national eligibility criteria and reflected the government's priorities for the schemes. The government's guidance for the local authority discretionary business scheme stated that the grant funding was to be used primarily and predominantly to support those businesses who were defined as a small or micro business, had relatively high ongoing fixed property costs, could demonstrate that they had suffered a significant fall in income due to COVID-19, and who occupied a property or part of a property with a rateable value or rent annual mortgage payments of below £51,000. In the first 2 phases of the schemes, which were agreed by this committee on the 12th of June, it was noted that whilst we would like to help all affected businesses, it would not be possible within this limited funding. The amount of funding was considered to be relatively small compared to the amount of number of businesses not eligible for other COVID-19 supports. For this reason, the agreed scheme opened to applications in 2 phases to effectively manage the demand, the available funding, and the grant levels were positioned to support all eligible businesses. The first 2 phases of the scheme also reflected the business types the government's guidance asked local authorities to consider prioritising, these being bed and breakfast businesses that paid council tax rather than business rates, small charities in receipt of charitable relief that were not able to receive small business rate relief, small businesses in shared offices and flexible workspaces, and regular market traders who did not have their own business rates assessment. Sufficient funding remained following the assessment of these applications, and a further third phase of the grant scheme was approved by this committee on the 12th of August 2020, which widened the scope of the scheme to include micro and small businesses in all sectors and to extend the criteria to include businesses occupying premises with a rateable value or rent of up to £100,000. Assessment of the applications was undertaken by officers within the revenues teams and the economic growth and transport teams. Each application was assessed in line with the scheme criteria. We have also reconsidered applications originally rejected in the first phases 1 and 2 and have dealt with a number of appeals to ensure grants have been correctly awarded. The administration of the scheme has been time consuming given the evidence required to satisfy the criteria that each business has had to meet. To date, 157 businesses have met the eligibility criteria for the grant scheme, and that totals £900,000. Any remaining funding after the 30th of September has to be returned to government, and this would be approximately £1.4 million. The The government announced at the end of July that all the grant schemes had to close to applications by the 28th of August. This included the discretionary business grant scheme. This was reported when phase 3 of the grant scheme was agreed by this committee on the 12th of August. This means that no further phases of grant applications can be opened up, and we are unable to extend the grant scheme further to include other businesses. So this report provides the opportunity to support those eligible businesses by increasing the level of grant provided. Given the closing date of the scheme by government, this is the only opportunity we have to increase the award of our discretionary grants. Therefore, the proposed level of grant is to increase for micro businesses from £5,000 to £10,000, for market traders from £2,000 to £10,000, for bed and breakfast businesses from £5,000 to £10,000, and for businesses occupying non-domestic premises with a rateable value of no more than £15,000 to increase to £25,000. This means our discretionary business grant scheme would support eligible businesses who are faced with relatively high business premise costs and had a significant fall in income. And it also means that the level of the award would match the grants given under the initial small business and retail hospitality leisure grants. We've raised awareness of the grant schemes through sharing, such as sharing through the council's official social media channels, with stakeholders in relevant business sectors, and through regular weekly newsletters issued by the council's economic growth business team. Details of how to apply for the different grant schemes have been available on our website and on the gov.uk website, and businesses that were not eligible in the first scheme were made aware of the availability of the discretionary grant funding. It is recognised that some businesses will not be supported through this grant scheme, and the basis of the scheme criteria has remained throughout that it was to support businesses that were faced with relatively high fixed ongoing business premise rental costs compared to their income during lockdown in May and April. Businesses that were not eligible for or have not received grant funding should be able to benefit from other measures in the government's package of support for businesses, such as the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. For those that were faced with a low income, there is also support through universal credit and help through council tax payments through our council tax reduction scheme. The proposal to increase the grant levels would provide further support to businesses and reduce the funding to be returned to government, and I would ask you to consider approving the recommendations set out in my report. I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for that comprehensive report. I've got Councillor Swift with a question, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Julie, thank you very much for it. Is a detailed report, and if you add this to your further reports presented to us at earlier urgency committees, you get a very good picture of the work and effort that you're putting in to make all this happen. I think I have 3 questions, if I may, which hopefully go to some explanation of why we're in this situation. Because I think when you did the earlier applications of at the last urgency committee, our hope was that we'd be a little bit nearer to our target, and we've only given £900,000 away to 157 companies. I wonder if you could perhaps tell us a little bit more about why that was underutilised compared to our first expectation, because that explains a little bit why we've got this money to continue to give. The second question, if I may, is just to make sure I understand something. When we approved this at our last urgency committee, one of the conditions was that the person applying for the grant had to demonstrate a drop in income. And could you just confirm that's still the case today? So this isn't being given out to anybody who claims to be in these categories. They have to still demonstrate the performance of the original criteria. And then perhaps just educate us a little bit on the third question, is why you are standardising around £10,000 for all of these types of businesses, just so that people get a flavour of why that is the case, if that's all right. I realise I've taken advantage of 3 questions, but hopefully they're general enough to broaden people's awareness of the report, because this sits within my portfolio and I've had a little bit of access to it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swift. Yeah, of course. So the first question with regards to the fact that we've supported 157 businesses amounting to £900,000, which is obviously significantly less than the allocation that we were allotted. We were faced with a a difficult situation when designing the scheme in order to support the businesses with regards to following the government priorities, but that awareness of not knowing what the demand would be, and our sort of information that we'd had through the grant scheme, that there was a number of businesses that were contacting us that were not able to be eligible for the first schemes. There was a lot of contact through particular cases where, you know, sort of raising the awareness that, you know, they also weren't eligible. We had no information or very little information around the numbers of businesses that were in shared workspaces, some of the elements, the bed and breakfasts, the market traders, etc., and the charities, we did have more information on. But we needed to, the most important thing is that we needed to effectively manage that the funding allocation. So by opening up in phases and by, you know, opening up to different business types, that was our way to be able to manage that income, as well as ensuring that we that funding, as well as ensuring that we were meeting the government priorities without sort of overstretching ourselves on the scheme. The second question you asked around was about the fall in income, so the proof. So the criteria of the scheme has remained throughout, that businesses have had to provide evidence that their income has fallen. And when we're looking at making the assessment, it was that they had to have relatively high property costs in comparison to the income that they had through that COVID lockdown as well. So that's remained constant. That is one of the main criteria of the scheme. You've also asked around the consideration for why 10,000. Obviously, with the remaining funding, there is the ability to be able to increase the grants. The government criteria means that we can only provide grants of any amount up to £10,000, and then after £10,000, it can only be 25,000. So there's no in between that 10,000 and 25,000. But by the proposed levels that we're proposing today, is that increase then matches those businesses that were eligible in those first schemes. So, you know, they didn't have to, in the first schemes, they weren't having to provide that they had a fall in income or that they had, you know, relatively high property costs. This scheme, they have had to do those additional criteria, and then also as well, it would mean that there is that parity between the two schemes with regards to the level of grants.
That's great. Thank you very much for answering those so thoroughly. Very much appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much. I've now got Councillor Paraskos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Jolie, I just wholeheartedly support these grants to support these small businesses that have had a very difficult time. But I've got a question around the markets, which comes under my portfolio. Will the market traders be receiving a further 10,000 to the 2 that they've had? And I've got a second question, Mr. Mayor, if it's okay. How many traders were actually eligible for this grant?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Paraskos. So with regards to the first question, which has now slipped my mind now, I can't remember what I've written it down. Oh, the 10,000, that was 10, it, yeah. So they've been granted £2,000. We would top that up to £10,000. So they would receive a further grant of £8,000 if it was agreed. In terms of the numbers, there have been 20 market traders that have been successful in their application. And there was only a couple that weren't eligible. The others we haven't received applications from either in the first phases 1 or 2 or in the subsequent final phase either.
Mr. Mayor, may I have a supplementary?
You may.
Thank you very much. The traders that didn't receive a grant from us, is the reason for that as they may have applied for grants in other areas, other districts?
That's right. One of the criteria was that they couldn't apply for if they couldn't receive a grant for themselves if they'd had the discretionary business grant provided by another authority.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Julie, for again a lovely comprehensive report, doing some wonderful work for those smaller businesses out there that are undoubtedly suffered and will be suffering as we go forward, unfortunately. Can I just ask, and maybe I've missed this one, you're talking about those that have already applied and you're going to up the grant given to them. Are there other businesses out there that you feel that we haven't reached yet, that maybe have not been aware or somehow not been informed or whatever? Are we aware that any more are existing out there?
Okay, we're in the position now where the government have closed the scheme as of the 28th of August. So if there are other businesses out there that have chosen not to apply or were not aware, we haven't got that opportunity now to be able to open the scheme up again to further applications. We're bound by the government's requirements on that. So, you know, we have actively marketed this. You know, there was a great deal of awareness, you know, in the business areas of the grants that were available in the first schemes, and then obviously the second scheme as well. So, you know, I would like to think that all businesses that believe that they were eligible have applied, and I think, you know, the criteria being set that there was, you know, that demonstration of that fall in income as well could, you know, maybe mean that some business haven't have applied. But I'm hopeful that all businesses have been made aware of it, but that there will always be some, you know, that haven't been aware.
I'm not saying that we didn't make it aware, because we really did make it very much aware. I was just wanted to pull that information out from you, because I think anyone listening to this may not have had a chance to read the report and think there might be an opportunity for somebody they know to get in and apply. And I just needed that to be brought out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Marsh?
No, that's it. Thank you, Chairman. OK, we've got Councillor Lumbie then, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Julie, I would like to ask you about the increase in grants for market traders. Clearly, everybody's suffering. You know, it's absolutely dire for businesses of all sizes these days, obviously, and will continue to be so for the foreseeable future. But why has it been increased, could you tell me, from 2,000 to 10,000 for market traders, when they clearly have very low overheads compared to an awful lot of other people? Are you able to answer that? Or is that a government directive?
No, the level of grants is at the discretion, you know, within the scheme. So, you know, we're here tonight to, you know, for you to decide on the you know, whether to increase and the level of the increase. It is around the fact that market traders were a priority business case, which is why they're in a category of their own. There will be other businesses within the micro or the small business categories that, you know, will have lower overheads, you know, lower rental costs, and the grants, you know, would be fairly high in comparison to those. But we do, you know, my recommendation is that we have that consistency of approach, that, you know, this was a scheme, a discretionary scheme that was brought in to help businesses that had fallen through the cracks and missed out on the opportunity to get a £10,000 grant or a £25,000 in the first round. So by proposing sort of 10,000 for all businesses as the minimum grant that we can give under this scheme, because there is sufficient funding, would provide that consistency and parity between the two schemes.
Can I come back, Mr. Mayor?
Absolutely, yes, please.
Yes, thank you. I still don't understand why it's almost as if the government, the money is there. From what you're saying, the money's there, so you're just trying to get rid of it, which I don't think is a good plan, because it's all got to be paid back. So I think it should only proportionally be increased if appropriate. And it just seems to me to go from 2 to 10 compared to the other figures you gave for the other people, the other industries, really high. The other thing I wanted to say is I think the third tranche of grants, and in fact, I think they were all highly dependent on people paying rent. People are excluded if they weren't paying rent and things, if they own the property, for example. Well, market traders don't have rents. Why is, I just don't understand why the increase has gone from 2 to 10 when they have tiny overheads, comparatively speaking.
Okay. The basis of the scheme when we were assessing it was that we weren't awarding a grant based on the level of their premises costs. You know, it was a set amount. If they met the criteria that they had relatively high premise, rental costs in comparison to their income in April and May of this year when there was lockdown, then they would be eligible under that criteria. So there was no a change of the grant level depending on how much rent they actually paid. If you met the criteria that you had high rent in comparison to your income, and you had a significant fall in your income, then you were awarded that level of grant, that everybody got the same amount of grants.
Thank you. Can I just say briefly, I would rather, if you have this money to spare, as it were, you haven't got rid of everything in the kitty, I would rather see that hike go to businesses with more overheads. That's all I wanted to say, than a market trader who doesn't have any rent or anything like that, doesn't have any offices set up or any of the bills that every small business has. Telephone, we all know the list of on a cash balance, a balance sheet. So I would prefer to see, if you've got the money to spare, the government allows it to go to businesses who have a lot of expenses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Swift, before I come to you, could any other members that want to ask questions, could you put a note in the chat for after Councillor Swift's comments? Over to you, Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to build on Councillor Lumby's comments, because just to make sure people understand, I fully understand the concern about the rise in levels, but there are two performance criteria still required. So the people still have to demonstrate that they have operational costs that are involved in this, and they also have to produce a proof of performance that their income has been substantially impacted. So this is not just free money for anybody who's in a category. They are still operating under a performance component that is critical to our assessment of whether the money is going to be distributed. Is that right, Ms. Gillette?
Yes, that's correct. And again, that was, as I highlighted before, that was different to the first scheme where there weren't those criteria about that performance.
So it really is just balancing up on to those people that have genuinely got a performance issue, and making the schemes more equitable with those that have already qualified for it, which is why I think quite a lot of your conventional market traders have not actually applied for this grant, because in your case, Councillor Lumby, they won't have rentals and therefore know they won't have qualified for it, or in some cases continue to trade and won't have seen a loss of income and therefore won't actually have applied because they know they won't qualify. And of course, the third part of that is that we have a system that looks at that and checks the proof of performance and only awards when the proof of performance is delivered upon.
Thank you very much. I haven't got any more questions in my chat box. Just before we go to ask for a proposer seconder, can I just have confirmation from yourself, Elizabeth, please, that I haven't missed any questions?
No, there's nobody further asked.
Thank you. Could I then move, ask somebody to move and second the motion, please?
Chair, if I may, I've been engaged in this, and Julie's been extremely helpful in enabling me to understand in detail. So I'd really like to move this proposal, if I may.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second it, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Aldred, I think that was you seconding it. Thank you. So it's been proposed and seconded. Is there any debate? Not seeing anything coming up on the screen, so if there's no debate, we'll go to the vote. Elizabeth.
Councillor, did you raise your hand just now, Councillor Aldred?
No.
No, that's fine. Okay, yeah, right, we'll move to the vote then. That's fine. So just indicate for, against, or abstain, please. So Councillor Aldred.
4.
Councillor Harrison.
4.
Councillor Haslam.
4.
Councillor Hawke.
4.
Councillor Lumby.
4.
Councillor Marsh.
4.
Councillor Martin.
4.
Councillor Myatt.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
4.
There's an echo. Councillor Praskos.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Sims
4.
and Councillor Swift.
4, 4, 4.
Thank you very much. That's carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the meeting. So just before councillors and officers disappear, we'll just wait for confirmation that the live link has been terminated.